The bell above the glass door chimed a familiar, welcome tune, a sound that signaled the start of their favorite weekly ritual. For a young mother and her 8-year-old son, this bustling Taco Bell on a Friday afternoon was more than just a fast food joint. It was their sanctuary, a small corner of the world where the pressures of school and work melted away into the cheerful, brightly lit chaos. The air inside was thick with a unique and comforting perfume, the savory scent of seasoned beef sizzling on the griddle, the sweet, spicy promise of fire sauce packets, and the warm, sugary aroma of cinnamon twists fresh from the fryer. For her, this smell was the scent of a small, hard-won victory. Her son, a small whirlwind of energy in a brightly colored t-shirt, was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet beside her. His hand, small and warm, was tucked securely into hers, his fingers squeezing with excitement. "Mom, can we get the cheesy potato things this time? And a Baja Blast? The big one?" He chattered, his voice a high, eager melody that cut through the low hum of conversation and the hiss of the soda fountain. He was a live wire of joy, his eyes wide as he took in the colorful menu boards plastered with pictures of crunchwraps and chalupas. This was his castle, and he was the prince. The mother offered a tired but genuine smile, the lines around her eyes softening as she looked down at him. "We'll see, sweetie. You know the deal. One main thing, one side, and a drink. That's our rule." She was still wearing the dark polo shirt from her shift at the retail store, the fabric feeling slightly stiff and smelling faintly of warehouse dust. A long day was etched onto her face, but it was a face that lit up when she was with him. He was her anchor, the reason she worked double shifts and counted every penny. Seeing this pure, unadulterated happiness on his face was worth more than any paycheck. She squeezed his hand back, a silent promise that everything was okay. Even when the weight of the world felt heavy on her shoulders, they moved slowly forward in the line. A human river of people with their own stories. A group of teenagers in high school varsity jackets laughed loudly at a table in the corner, their phones out as they recorded a silly dance. An elderly man sat alone by the window, methodically dipping a single tortilla chip into a small cup of salsa, his gaze lost in the parking lot outside. A young couple on a date shared a nachos fries box, their heads close together, whispering and smiling. Each person was a world unto themselves, and for a moment, she felt a sense of connection to them all, these fellow travelers seeking a simple, affordable meal and a moment of respite. As they waited, her son's stream of consciousness continued unabated. "And guess what? At school today, we had to draw our favorite superhero, and I drew the one from that game. The one with the laser eyes? I made him super cool, with a cape that goes all the way to his feet. Mrs. Davison said it was the best one in the class." He puffed out his chest with pride, and the mother's heart swelled. She loved these moments, these glimpses into his vibrant inner world. It was a world she fought hard to protect, a world she hoped would always be this full of wonder and excitement. She let him talk, nodding and murmuring words of encouragement, but a part of her mind was elsewhere. It was running the numbers, a constant background calculation that had become second nature. Rent was due next week. The electric bill was higher than she'd expected, and the car had made that funny sound again on the drive over. This $12 lunch was a luxury, a line item in a budget that was already stretched far too thin. She had checked her bank account that morning, her stomach clenching as she saw the balance. It would be fine, she told herself. It had to be fine. This weekly treat was their thing, a promise she had made to him and to herself. It was a non-negotiable piece of their happiness. In a booth tucked away in the far corner, almost hidden in the shadow of a large promotional poster for a new limited-time burrito, a man sat alone. He was unremarkable at first glance, just another figure in the crowd. He wore a simple, dark gray hoodie, the kind a million other people own, and a black baseball cap pulled low, casting his face in shadow. He hunched over his tray slightly, creating a small, private bubble for himself amidst the restaurant's cheerful noise. He had a Crunchwrap Supreme and a small soda, and he ate slowly, methodically, his focus mostly on the phone in his hand. He scrolled through it with a quiet intensity, his thumb moving in a steady rhythm. He didn't look up, didn't engage with anyone. He was a shadow in the bustling room, a man who seemed to want nothing more than to finish his meal in peace and disappear back into the afternoon. He was just another piece of the background, another story in a room full of them. Completely unnoticed by the mother and her son as they finally reached the front of the line. "Hi? Welcome to Taco Bell. What can I get for you today?" The young cashier asked, her voice bright and practiced. The mother took a deep breath, pushing away the nagging financial worries. This was their time. She looked down at her beaming son, whose face was pressed up against the glass counter, staring at the desserts. "Okay, buddy," she said, her voice warm and full of love. "What's it going to be?" The future, with all its uncertainties, could wait for the next 12 minutes. Right now, all that mattered was the simple, profound joy of choosing a lunch with her favorite person in the world. The young cashier, with a name tag that read Alex, flashed a practiced, cheerful smile. "All right, so that's one cheesy gordita crunch combo with a Baja Blast, and one kid's meal with a Cinnabon Delights. Anything else for you today?" The mother hesitated for a split second, her eyes darting to the display of desserts. Her son's gaze followed hers, his own eyes widening with hope. She knew she shouldn't. Every extra dollar was a soldier in a losing battle. But seeing that look, the pure, unadulterated longing for a small, sweet treat, she felt her resolve crumble. "You know what?" she said, her voice a little brighter than she felt. "Let's add one more order of those Cinnabon Delights, just for us to share." Her son let out a small gasp of pure joy, squeezing her hand tightly. "Okay, that'll be $14.83, Alex said. Tapping the screen with finality, the mother pulled her debit card from the worn leather wallet tucked inside her purse. It was a familiar, well-worn card, the edges starting to soften and the numbers slightly faded from years of use. She had used it 1,000 times for groceries, for gas, for this very same lunch treat just last week. It was a key to a normal life, a plastic promise that she could provide for her son. She handed it to the cashier, her movements confident and automatic. There was no reason to think this time would be any different. Alex took the card, swiped it through the machine, and turned the small screen toward her to enter her PIN. She typed in the 4-digit code, a sequence as natural to her as her own name, and pressed the green Enter button. For a moment, nothing happened. The little screen on the card reader just blinked, a blank, black stare. Then a single stark word appeared in bright red letters. Declined. A cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach. "Oh," she said, a small, breathy sound of disbelief. "That's weird. Can we try that again?" Her voice was calm, but on the inside, a frantic alarm bell had started to ring. It had to be a mistake, a glitch in the machine. Maybe the Wi-Fi was down. Alex, ever the professional, simply nodded. "Sure, no problem." She took the card back, wiped it on her apron, and swiped it again. The mother re-entered her PIN, her fingers feeling suddenly clumsy and thick. She held her breath as she pressed Enter. The machine blinked again. The same 2 seconds of agonizing silence. And then the same soul-crushing word, declined. The cold knot in her stomach turned into a block of ice. This wasn't a glitch. This was real. A hot, prickly wave of heat washed over her face, and she knew she was blushing. She could feel the eyes of the person behind her in line, a sense of a presence that suddenly felt heavy and judgmental. Her mind started racing, a frantic, panicked scramble for an explanation. What had she forgotten? She mentally scrolled through her recent purchases. The gas on Tuesday, that was $40. The quick trip to the grocery store for milk and bread yesterday, about $25. She had been so careful. She had budgeted down to the last cent, or so she thought. Had an automatic payment gone through that she'd forgotten about? The car insurance? The internet bill? The numbers swam in her head, a jumbled mess of digits and due dates. She started, her voice now barely a whisper. She cleared her throat, trying to sound normal, but it came out as a croak. Is there another machine? Maybe this one isn't working? It was a desperate, flimsy excuse, and she knew it. Alex gave her a sympathetic look, a look that was somehow worse than an impatient one. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is the only one, and it seems to be working fine for everyone else." The last part was said gently, but it landed like a blow. It wasn't the machine. It was her. Her card? Her empty bank account. The line behind her was growing. She could hear a soft sigh, the shuffling of feet. The cheerful buzz of the restaurant, which had sounded so welcoming just minutes ago, now felt like a cacophony of accusations. Every laugh, every crinkle of a wrapper, every slurp of a soda felt like it was directed at her. She was the center of a humiliating, silent spectacle. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking slightly as she searched for the small zippered compartment where she kept her cash. She had to have something. A few crumpled bills, maybe some change. "Mommy?" Her son's voice was small, cutting through the fog of her shame. He was no longer bouncing with excitement. He was standing perfectly still, his brow furrowed with a look of deep concern. He didn't understand about declined cards or bank balances. All he knew was that his mother, his rock, his everything, was upset. The simple, innocent question, filled with nothing but love and confusion, was the worst part of all. It was a mirror reflecting her failure back at her. She had let him down. In this simple, public place, in front of all these people, she had failed to do the most basic thing a mother is supposed to do: provide a meal. Her fingers closed around a few bills. She pulled them out, her hands trembling. A $5 bill, 2 single dollars, and a handful of change, which she quickly counted out. $3.50 in coins. $10.50 in total. It wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough. The total was $14.83. She was short by over $4. $4? It felt like a million. She stared at the pathetic pile of money in her hand. The crumpled bills and sweaty coins, a symbol of her desperation. The line was getting longer. She could feel the impatience like a physical force pressing against her back. A man in a business suit cleared his throat loudly. A teenager whispered something to his friend, and they both snickered. The world was shrinking to the size of this small space at the counter, a tiny stage for her public humiliation. Her son's hand found hers again, but this time it wasn't out of excitement. It was a gesture of comfort, a small, warm presence trying to soothe the distress he couldn't comprehend. The irony was agonizing. She looked at Alex, the young cashier, whose face was now a mask of awkward pity. She looked at the colorful menu board with its pictures of cheesy, delicious food that now seemed like a cruel joke. She looked at her son, whose hopeful face had fallen into a mask of worried sadness. The ice in her stomach spread through her veins. There was no other option. There was no miracle coming. She had to face it. "Alex," she said, her voice cracking. She took a deep, shaky breath and forced the words out, each one feeling like a shard of glass in her throat. "I'm so sorry. Can you please cancel the order?" The words hung in the air, a final, quiet admission of defeat. She was ready to grab her son's hand and run, to escape the suffocating weight of all those eyes and just disappear. She felt small and broken and utterly alone. The words hung in the air between her and the cashier, a small, sad cloud of defeat. Can you please cancel the order?" She felt the last bit of her strength drain away, leaving her feeling hollow and cold. All she wanted to do was grab her son's small hand and run, to escape the suffocating bubble of attention and disappear into the anonymity of the parking lot. The world had shrunk to this single, painful moment, and the walls were closing in. The cashier, a young woman who couldn't have been much older than 20, gave her a look of profound pity. Her fingers, adorned with bright blue nail polish, hovered over the touchscreen, ready to erase the hopeful order that had caused so much distress. "Mommy?" her son asked again, his voice trembling slightly. "Why are we canceling? I thought we were getting the Cinnabon delights." His question wasn't a complaint. It was a plea for understanding. He was trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces, and the confusion in his eyes was a knife twist in her heart. She didn't have an answer she could give him, not one that a little boy could understand. How could she explain the cruel adult world of declined cards and empty bank accounts? How could she tell him that their special treat, their weekly ritual, had been ruined because his mother had failed? She opened her mouth to say something, anything, a lie, a distraction, a promise to come back another time, but no sound came out. Her throat was tight with unshed tears. She just squeezed his hand, a silent apology that felt utterly inadequate. The cashier's finger began to descend on the screen, the final, digital nail in the coffin of their Friday treat, and then a voice cut through the heavy silence. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was calm, quiet, and so normal it was almost startling. "Hey, don't worry about it. I've got this." The mother froze. Her head, which had been bowed in shame, snapped up. She turned, her movements slow and stiff as if she were underwater. Standing there, just behind her, was the man from the corner booth. The one in the simple gray hoodie and black baseball cap. In her state of panic, she hadn't even noticed him get up. He was just a blur of a person, a background character who had suddenly stepped into the foreground of her personal nightmare. For a second, her mind couldn't process it. Was he talking to her? Was this some kind of cruel joke? She looked at his face, but the brim of his cap casted his shadow. All she could see was the line of his jaw and a hint of a kind, gentle mouth. The cashier was just as confused, her finger still hovering in midair. I'm sorry?" The mother managed to stammer, her voice barely audible. The man took a small step forward, closing the distance between them. He reached up and slowly, deliberately, took off his baseball cap. As he did, the harsh fluorescent lights of the Taco Bell illuminated his face, and a collective, almost silent gasp seemed to ripple through the immediate vicinity. It was him. The face from the movies, the one everyone knew. The kind, soulful eyes. The slightly world-weary but gentle expression. It was unmistakable. The mother's jaw went slack. Her mind, which had been a frantic mess of numbers and fears just moments before, went completely blank. It was like a switch had been flipped, and the entire world shifted on its axis. The teenage girls in the corner stopped giggling. The man in the business suit, who had been sighing with impatience, now stared with wide-eyed disbelief. A phone, held discreetly by a woman a few people back in line, was slowly and carefully raised before she could form a coherent thought, let alone a protest. The man was already moving. He stepped past her, up to the counter, and pulled a simple leather wallet from his back pocket. It wasn't a fancy designer wallet. It looked worn and well-used, just like hers. He slid out a credit card and handed it to the stunned cashier. "Put their order on mine," he said, his voice still calm and even. He glanced at the screen, then back at the little boy who was staring up at him with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. "And, he added, a thoughtful expression crossing his face, "let them get a second order of those Cinnabon Delights." "For the road?" The cashier, Alex, seemed to snap out of her trance. A huge, genuine smile spread across her face, replacing the look of awkward pity. "Absolutely," she said, her voice full of new energy. She took the card, her hands moving with a newfound purpose. The little beep of the machine this time was the sweetest sound the mother had ever heard. It was the sound of salvation. The mother finally found her voice, though it was shaky and thick with emotion. "Thank you. You really don't have to do that. I can't." She trailed off, overwhelmed. What could she possibly say? This was a movie star, a stranger, paying for her son's lunch. It was surreal, like something out of, well, a movie. The man just gave a small, humble shrug as he took his card back from the cashier and tucked it into his wallet. "Of course," he said, his eyes meeting hers. They were incredibly kind, with no hint of judgment or pity, just a simple, straightforward warmth. "It's just lunch. Please, let me—" The way he said it, so gentle and sincere, completely disarmed her. He wasn't making her feel like a charity case. He was just being a decent human being. The shame that had been burning her face began to cool, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Then he did something that truly broke the dam. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with her 8-year-old son. The little boy, who had been silent and still, now looked up at this famous face with a mixture of shyness and wonder. "Hey, buddy," the man said, his voice soft and friendly. "I hope you get that video game you were talking about. The one with the laser eyes. They're a lot of fun." He had been listening. From across the restaurant, in his quiet corner booth, he had heard the excited chatter of a little boy. The realization sent a fresh wave of emotion through the mother. This wasn't just a random act. It was an act of true, attentive empathy. He reached out and gave the boy's shoulder a gentle, reassuring pat. "You enjoy your lunch, okay?" The boy, finding his voice, just nodded, a wide, slow smile spreading across his face. "Okay," he whispered. The man stood up, pulling his baseball cap back on. He gave the mother one last, kind smile, a simple nod that said everything was going to be all right. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward his booth to gather his things. He didn't wait for thanks or applause. He didn't draw any more attention to himself. He just stepped in, fixed the problem with a quiet grace, and was ready to disappear. The entire restaurant was watching him now, but he seemed completely unaware, or maybe just completely unconcerned. The atmosphere had been transformed. The impatient tension was gone, replaced by a shared, silent feeling of wonder. The mother stood there, her son's hand still in hers, and watched him, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. This time she didn't wipe it away. The cashier, Alex, beamed as she placed the last item on the plastic tray. It looked like a feast. The cheesy gordita crunch, perfectly wrapped in its signature paper holder. The small, colorful kid's meal box, which her son knew by heart, contained a taco, a small drink, and a toy. The large, frosty cup of Baja Blast condensation already beating on its sides. And then there were the Cinnabon Delights. 2 boxes of them. The one they had originally ordered, and the second miraculous box, a gift from a stranger. The sight of it, that small, extra box of sweet, warm dough, felt like the most profound act of generosity she had ever witnessed. "Here you go," Alex said, her voice full of a warmth that hadn't been there a few minutes ago. "Enjoy your lunch." Her eyes met the mother's, and in them was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that something special had just happened. The mother reached for the tray, her hand still feeling a little unsteady. It felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of the kindness was added to the physical weight of the food. Her son was quiet, but his eyes were wide, fixed on the tray and then on the man who was now walking back to his corner booth. He seemed to be moving in slow motion, a figure of quiet grace in a world that had just been thrown into chaos, and then gently put back together again. She needed to find a table. Holding the tray with one hand and her son's hand with the other, she turned away from the counter. The journey from the counter to a vacant booth felt like the longest walk of her life. Before, she had felt invisible, just another body in the crowd. Now she felt seen. But it wasn't the piercing, judgmental gaze she had feared. It was something else entirely. The group of teenagers in the corner were no longer snickering. One of them caught her eye and gave her a small, almost shy smile and a nod. The elderly man by the window looked up from his chips, his gaze lingering on her and her son for a moment before he offered a gentle, approving nod of his own. The entire energy of the restaurant had shifted. The impatience was gone, replaced by a soft, collective hum of goodwill. It was as if the man's simple act of kindness had created a ripple, changing the emotional temperature of the entire room. She slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl cool against her back. Her son scrambled in beside her, his eyes never leaving the tray. She placed it in the center of the table, a small altar of fast food miracles. For a moment, they just looked at it. Neither of them moved. The mother was trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The shame was gone, completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude that was so powerful it almost hurt. It was a warmth that spread through her chest, pushing out the last of the cold, icy fear that had taken hold just minutes before. "Mom," her son whispered, his voice full of wonder. He was the man from the movie, right? The one who fights the bad guys in the computer? The mother nodded, a tear she hadn't realized was forming finally breaking free and rolling down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand, but she was smiling now. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, sweetie," she said, her voice soft. "That was him." "Wow," he breathed, the word full of all the awe little boy could muster. He reached out and gently touched one of the boxes of Cinnabon Delights as if it were a sacred artifact. They began to unpack their food, a familiar ritual that now felt entirely new. She unwrapped her gordita crunch, the scent of the spicy, cheesy sauce filling the air. He opened his kid's meal box, pulling out the small toy with a level of excitement that was pure and uncomplicated. She poured some of the Baja Blast into the lid of his cup for him to sip, just like she always did. These small, mundane actions were infused with a new significance. They were no longer just a mother and son grabbing a cheap lunch. They were the recipients of a moment of pure, unselfish grace. She took a bite of her gordita crunch. It was delicious. It was the same thing she ordered every single time, but today it tasted like the best thing she had ever eaten. The flavors were more vibrant, the textures more satisfying. It wasn't the food that had changed. It was her. The meal was no longer just fuel. It was a memory being created in real time. "You know," she said after swallowing her first bite, "that was a very, very kind thing that man did." Her son nodded, his mouth full of taco. "He got us extra Cinnabons," he said, as if that was the most important part of the entire transaction. And in a way she thought it wasn't just about paying for the meal. It was about seeing a little boy's desire for a treat and making sure it was fulfilled, and then some. It was about adding a little extra sweetness to a moment that had turned sour. It was, she agreed. And you know what the most important thing to do is when someone is kind to you. He looked up at her, his thoughtful expression a perfect mirror of her own. "What? We say thank you. And then we try to be kind to other people too. We pass it on." The words came out naturally, a lesson she hadn't planned, but that felt incredibly important to teach in this very moment. This was the real takeaway, the real nourishment from this meal. As they ate, she glanced over at the corner booth. The man was finished. He was crumpling up his wrapper and sliding his trash into the small bin on his tray. He stood up, pulling his hoodie over his head and putting his baseball cap back on. He was once again becoming just another figure in the crowd, retreating into the shadows of his anonymity. He didn't look around for acknowledgement or thanks. He didn't make a big show of leaving. He just picked up his tray and headed for the exit, but as he walked past their booth, he slowed down for just a second. He looked at her son, who was now happily dunking a Cinnabon Delight into a small puddle of its own icing. A faint, private smile touched the man's lips. Then he looked at the mother, and his eyes met hers one last time. It was a quick, quiet glance, but in it she saw no pity, no condescension. Just a simple, shared human connection. He gave a final, almost imperceptible nod, and then he was gone. The bell on the door chiming his quiet departure, the mother and her son continued their meal in a happy, warm bubble. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but for her, nothing would ever be normal again. The world felt a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder. She knew she would never forget this day. This simple lunch at a Taco Bell that had taught her more about humanity than any book or movie ever could. And as she watched her son happily lick the icing from his fingers, she made a silent promise to herself and to the kind man in the hoodie she would pass it on. She would find a way to be someone else's unexpected kindness. The last Cinnabon Delight was gone, and the little boy licked the final trace of sweet icing from his fingers with a look of pure satisfaction. The mother gathered the empty wrappers and boxes, piling them neatly onto the plastic tray. The feast was over, but the feeling it left behind lingered in the air between them, a warm, comfortable silence. The second box of Cinnabon Delights sat unopened on the table, a small, sweet promise for later. It was a tangible reminder of the kindness they had just received, a symbol of a moment that felt too big to be contained within the four walls of a Taco Bell. "Ready to go, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded, his energy now calm and content. "Can we take the other Cinnabons home?" Of course, she said with a smile. They're for us. She picked up the tray and her son's hand, and together they walked toward the exit. This time, the walk across the restaurant felt different. She didn't feel the weight of being watched. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of connection. The cashier, Alex, gave her a final, warm wave. The elderly man by the window offered another gentle nod. It was as if they were all part of a secret club, the witnesses to a small miracle. As she pushed the glass door open, the little bell chimed its tune once more, but this time it sounded like a happy final note to their unexpected adventure. The afternoon sun was bright as they walked to her old, reliable car. She buckled her son into his booster seat, the familiar clicks and clunks of the seatbelt a grounding, normal sound. As she slid into the driver's seat, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The anxiety that had been her constant companion for so long had momentarily vanished. She started the engine and the car rumbled to life. She pulled out of the parking lot and onto the busy street, the world rushing by in a blur of color and motion. For a few minutes, they drove in silence. Her son stared out the window, watching the other cars and buildings go by. She could tell he was thinking, his little mind processing the extraordinary events of the last hour. She let him be, content to just exist in the quiet aftermath. Finally, he spoke. "Mom? Yes, sweetie? Why did that man pay for our lunch?" His voice was clear and direct. Seeking a simple truth in a complicated world, she glanced over at him in the rearview mirror. His face was serious, his brow furrowed in thought. She took a deep breath, knowing this was one of the most important conversations she would ever have with him. "Well," she began, choosing her words carefully, "sometimes people see that another person needs a little help. And when they see that, they have a choice. They can pretend they didn't see it, or they can decide to be kind. That man, he decided to be kind. But he didn't even know us," the boy said, a note of confusion in his voice. "That's right," she agreed. "He didn't know us at all. And that's what makes it so special. He didn't do it because he was our friend or because he wanted something from us. He did it simply because it was a good thing to do. He saw that I was having a hard time, and he saw that you were excited about your lunch, and he wanted to make sure our day stayed a happy one." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You know how when you fall down on the playground and another kid helps you get back up, even if you don't know them?" He nodded, like Tommy did last week when I scraped my knee. "Exactly like that," she said. "It's the same feeling. It's called empathy. It's when you feel what someone else is feeling and you want to help them feel better. That man had empathy for us." "So, being kind is like helping someone up when they fall down?" he asked, his voice full of new understanding. "It's exactly like that," she said, her heart swelling with pride. "Sometimes people fall down in ways you can't see, like when you can't pay for your lunch. And a kind word or a small helping hand can be just like helping them get back up on their feet." They drove on, the conversation flowing naturally. He told her about other times he had seen kids be kind at school, sharing their crayons or helping someone who was lost. She listened, encouraging him, reinforcing the idea that kindness wasn't just about grand gestures from movie stars. It was about the small, everyday choices we all make. "When I grow up," he declared from the back seat, his voice full of conviction, "I'm going to be kind like that man. If I see someone who needs help, I'm going to help them." A single, happy tear escaped her eye, and she quickly wiped it away. "I know you will, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you will." Later that evening, after her son was tucked into bed and dreaming of laser-eyed superheroes, she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. The day felt like a dream, and she was half afraid that if she thought about it too hard, it would disappear. Then a notification popped up. A friend had tagged her in a post in a local community group. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked on the link. It was a short, shaky video, clearly filmed on a phone. The camera was pointed discreetly over the top of a menu. She could see the back of her own head, her son's small figure beside her, and the man in the hoodie stepping forward. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the whole interaction play out. The caption read, You won't believe who just paid for this mom and her son's lunch at the Taco Bell on 5th Street. I was almost in tears. What an incredible human being. We need more of this in the world. She stared at the post, her breath caught in her throat. Dozens of comments had already appeared. Wow, what a legend. This is why he's everyone's favorite. Forget the movies, this is his best role yet. But the comments that meant the most were the ones that weren't about him. This inspired me to pay for the person's coffee behind me this morning. I'm going to go do something nice for a stranger right now. The story just made my whole week. She read through them, a feeling of awe washing over her. Their private moment of desperation and relief had become a public lesson in kindness. The story wasn't just about them anymore. It had taken on a life of its own, becoming a small beacon of hope in a world that often felt dark and divided. She felt a surge of gratitude, not just to the man, but to everyone who was sharing the story and carrying its message forward. In the days and weeks that followed, the memory of that lunch became a cornerstone of her life. She found herself looking for opportunities to pass on the kindness. She left a larger tip for a tired-looking waitress. She bought a hot meal for a man sitting on a cold street corner. She let someone with only a few items go ahead of her in the long grocery line. They were small things, but they felt huge. Each act was a quiet thank you to the stranger in the hoodie, a way of keeping the ripple going. She never saw the man again, but she didn't need to. He had given her something far more valuable than a free lunch. He had given her a renewed faith in humanity and a powerful lesson to teach her son. The true stun of that day wasn't the shock of seeing a famous person in a fast food restaurant. It was the stunning, breathtaking power of a single, selfless act. It was the realization that in a world full of noise and division, a quiet moment of compassion could stop everything, change everything, and connect us all in the most profound and beautiful way. And for that, she would be forever grateful.